She stood at the bottom of the marble staircase, 6 months pregnant, bleeding. Her husband stood above her, phone in hand, calling 911. To the world, he was the perfect husband, a tech billionaire, a philanthropist, a devoted partner. But Sarah Bennett knew the truth. And when she tried to expose him, the system itself became his weapon. Psychiatric wards, legal technicalities, a justice system that protected the powerful. This is the story of how one woman lost everything, then fought back against impossible odds. If you believe survivors deserve justice, hit that like button, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe, because stories like this need to be heard. Let's begin. The ballroom of the Hilton Grand sparkled with chandeliers and champagne flutes. Sarah Bennett stood beside her husband, one hand resting on her 6-month baby bump, the other holding a microphone. Flashbulbs exploded as photographers jostled for position. We're thrilled to announce the Whitfield Foundation's $5 million scholarship fund for underprivileged students, Sarah said, her voice warm and steady. The crowd applauded. Beside her, Marcus Whitfield beamed, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. To everyone in that room, they were perfect. Marcus, 35, was the boy genius who'd built Tech Vista from a garage startup to a billion-dollar empire. Sarah, 28, had given up her nonprofit director position to support his vision. Together, they were Boston's golden couple. Any questions? Sarah asked the press. A reporter raised her hand. Sarah, will you return to nonprofit work after the baby? Before Sarah could answer, Marcus squeezed her shoulder. Hard. She felt his fingers dig into her collarbone, hidden beneath her silk dress. His smile never wavered. My wife has the most important job in the world now, Marcus said smoothly. Being a mother to our child. Sarah's throat tightened, but she nodded. The reporter scribbled notes. More questions came, all directed at Marcus. He answered each one while keeping that iron grip on Sarah's shoulder. When she shifted her weight, his fingers pressed harder. A warning. The gala continued for 3 more hours. Marcus worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, promising investments, telling jokes. Sarah stood beside him, smiling until her face ached. When she tried to sit down, Marcus pulled her back up. You need to network, he whispered in her ear. Stop being lazy. At 11 o'clock, they finally left. The moment their Tesla's doors closed, Marcus's mask cracked. What the hell was that? He snapped. Sarah blinked. What do you mean? You talk too much. You embarrassed me in front of investors. Marcus, I barely said anything. You answered most of the questions. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel. Sarah flinched. The baby kicked, as if sensing her fear. You think you're so smart, Marcus continued, his voice rising. You think you can take credit for my foundation, my money. I never said that. I was just trying to help. Help? He laughed, cold and sharp. You're nothing without my name. Sarah, nothing. You'd still be making $30,000 a year at that pathetic nonprofit if I hadn't saved you. Tears burned Sarah's eyes. This wasn't the first time. Over the past year, Marcus had changed. The sweet, attentive boyfriend had transformed into someone she barely recognized. At first, it was small things. Criticism about her clothes, her friends, her opinions. Then it escalated. Controlling the money, checking her phone, telling her where she could go. But tonight felt different. Tonight there was something dangerous in his eyes. They pulled into the garage of their Beacon Hill brownstone. Marcus got out without opening her door. Sarah followed him inside, her heels clicking on marble floors. The house was beautiful, all exposed brick and designer furniture. It felt like a museum. Cold, empty. Marcus, please, Sarah said, can we just talk about this? He spun around before she could react. He grabbed her arm and shoved her against the wall. Her back hit the exposed brick, knocking the wind from her lungs. Don't tell me what to do, he hissed, his face inches from hers. You live in my house. You spend my money. You carry my child. You do what I say. Sarah's whole body trembled. This was the first time he'd actually pushed her, the first time it had become physical. Then, just as suddenly, Marcus stepped back, his eyes filled with tears. Oh God, he whispered. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean that. Work has been so stressful. The board is pushing for an IPO, and I haven't slept in days. He reached for her hands. Please forgive me. You know this isn't who I am. Sarah wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to leave. But where would she go? She had no money of her own. Marcus had convinced her to quit her job. Her friends had slowly disappeared, one by one, as Marcus found reasons why each one was bad for her. And she was pregnant, 6 months pregnant with his child. It's okay, Sarah heard herself say. I know you're under pressure. Marcus pulled her into his arms. I love you so much, he murmured. I don't know what I'd do without you. That night, Sarah lay awake in their king-size bed, staring at the ceiling. Marcus slept peacefully beside her, as if nothing had happened. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby move. I'll protect you, she whispered. I promise. But deep down, Sarah knew the truth. The man she'd married was gone, and the monster who'd replaced him was just getting started. 3 days later, Sarah found the document. She'd been looking for their insurance cards, preparing for her next prenatal appointment. In Marcus's home office, she opened his filing cabinet. That's when she saw it, a manila folder labeled Bennett Prenuptial Agreement. Sarah's hands shook as she pulled it out. They'd never discussed a prenup. Marcus had insisted they didn't need one. I trust you completely, he'd said. We're partners. But here it was, 15 pages of legal language. Sarah's signature at the bottom, dated 2 years ago, a week before their wedding. She remembered that day vaguely. Marcus had brought home a stack of papers. Just boring insurance stuff, he'd said. Sign here and here. She'd trusted him. She'd signed without reading. Now, sitting at his desk. Sarah read every word. Her stomach turned to ice. The prenup gave her nothing. If they divorced, she'd leave with exactly what she'd brought into the marriage, which was almost nothing. All their assets, the house, the cars, the investments, everything belonged to Marcus, even the baby. There was a custody clause that gave Marcus primary custody if Sarah was deemed unfit by any medical professional. What are you doing? Sarah jumped. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. I was looking for insurance cards, Sarah said quickly. I found this prenup. Marcus, I don't remember signing this. He walked into the office, his footsteps measured. Of course you signed it. 2 years ago. Are you losing your mind? But we never discussed it. You told me it was insurance paperwork. Marcus's jaw tightened. Are you calling me a liar? No, I just don't understand why you'd hide this from me. Hide it? He laughed. It's been in that cabinet the whole time. You're the one snooping through my office. He moved closer. Maybe you're experiencing pregnancy brain. I've read it can cause memory problems. Sarah stood up, clutching the document. This isn't memory problems. This prenup says I get nothing if we divorce. It says you can take our baby. Our baby, Marcus's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. My baby, Sarah, my blood, my DNA. You're just the incubator. The words hit like a slap. Sarah stumbled backward. How can you say that? Because it's true. And if you try to leave me, you'll find out exactly how true it is. He grabbed the prenup from her hands. Now get out of my office. Sarah ran. She locked herself in the guest bathroom and sobbed until she couldn't breathe. The baby kicked frantically, responding to her distress. Over the next week, things got worse. Sarah's best friend, Jennifer, called to say she'd been fired from Tech Vista. Budget cuts, Jennifer explained, confused. But I thought the company was doing great. Sarah knew better. Marcus had fired Jennifer because she'd been encouraging Sarah to stand up for herself. Then Sarah's credit cards stopped working. At the grocery store, the cashier ran her Visa 3 times before shaking her head. Declined. That's impossible, Sarah said. When she got home, Marcus was waiting. I consolidated our finances, Pio announced. Everything runs through my corporate account now. It's more efficient for taxes. You can't just cut off my credit cards without telling me. I can do whatever I want. It's my money. He handed her a debit card. Here, this has a $500 monthly limit. That should be plenty for a pregnant woman who doesn't work. $500. Sarah's old nonprofit salary had been $30,000 a year. She'd been financially independent. Now she couldn't even buy groceries without Marcus's permission. The next morning, Sarah's car keys were gone. "Where are my keys?" she asked Marcus at breakfast. "The Tesla's in the shop," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Transmission issue." "What about my Subaru?" "Sold it? We didn't need two cars." Sarah's throat constricted. "When did you sell my car?" "Last week. I got a great price." He finally looked at her. "Why did you need to go somewhere?" "I have a doctor's appointment today." "Cancel it, or I'll drive you." His smile was sharp. "I wouldn't want you going anywhere alone. Not in your condition." That afternoon, while Marcus was in a meeting, Sarah tried to call Grace Novak, a divorce attorney Jennifer had recommended months ago. But her phone was dead. She plugged it in, but it wouldn't charge. When she checked the back, the SIM card was missing. Marcus had removed it. Sarah felt the walls closing in. No money, no car, no phone, no friends. She was trapped in this beautiful house with a man who was slowly erasing her existence. That night, while Marcus slept, Sarah made a decision. She packed a small bag with clothes, her passport, and the few pieces of jewelry her mother had given her. She'd sell the jewelry, get a bus ticket, go somewhere Marcus couldn't find her. At 3 in the morning, she crept downstairs. Marcus was standing in the foyer. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Sarah's bag slipped from her fingers. "I was just getting water." With a packed bag. He picked it up, opened it. Passport, jewelry, clothes. His face darkened. "You were leaving me." "Marcus, please. You were going to take my child away from me." His voice rose. "After everything I've given you, after I saved you from your pathetic little life. I can't do this anymore," Sarah cried. "You've taken everything from me. My friends, my money. You control every part of my life." "Because you need to be controlled," Marcus shouted. "You're weak. You're stupid. You'd be homeless without me." "I'd rather be homeless than live like this." The words hung in the air. Marcus's expression shifted from anger to something worse. Cold calculation. "You'll never take my child," he said quietly. Then he grabbed her arm and threw her toward the stairs. Sarah's foot caught on the bottom step. She fell forward, her hands reaching out to break the fall. She managed to catch herself on the third step, but the impact sent a shock of pain through her abdomen. She screamed. Marcus stood over her, breathing hard. For a moment, he looked shocked by what he'd done. Then his expression cleared. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "Help," Marcus said, his voice panicked. "My wife fell down the stairs. She's pregnant. Please hurry." Sarah lay on the steps, crying, her hands pressed against her belly. She felt wetness between her legs. Blood. "No," she whispered. "No, oh, no, oh, no." Marcus knelt beside her, but his eyes were calculating. "This is your fault," he hissed, too quiet for the 911 operator to hear. "You did this." In the distance, sirens wailed. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed for her baby. But deep down, she already knew. She could feel it, the terrible emptiness inside her. Her baby was dying. The hospital lights were too bright. Sarah blinked against them, disoriented. Machines beeped steadily beside her bed. An IV dripped clear fluid into her arm. Her abdomen ached with a deep, hollow pain. Then she remembered. "My baby." Sarah gasped, trying to sit up. A hand pressed gently on her shoulder. "Easy, honey. Don't move too fast." Sarah focused on the woman beside her bed. She was in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. Her white coat read, "Dr. Emily Brennan, Emergency Medicine." "Where's my baby?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. The emptiness inside her was answer enough. Dr. Brennan's expression softened. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. The trauma from your fall caused a placental abruption. We did everything we could, but we couldn't save the pregnancy." The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah's baby was gone. 6 months of feeling those tiny kicks, imagining that little face, planning that future. Gone. "How far did I fall?" Dr. Brennan asked quietly. "What?" Sarah's mind was foggy. "Your husband said you fell down a full flight of stairs, but your injuries don't match that story." The doctor pulled up Sarah's gown, revealing the bruises on her ribs and arms. "These are defensive wounds. And this," she pointed to Sarah's upper arm, "is a handprint. Someone grabbed you hard enough to leave a mark. Sarah's throat closed. She wanted to tell the truth, but Marcus's voice echoed in her head. You did this. This is your fault. I fell, Sarah whispered. Dr. Brennan studied her for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a card. My shift ends in an hour, she said quietly. But I want you to have this. She pressed the card into Sarah's hand. Her name is Grace Novak. She's an attorney who specializes in domestic violence cases. She's helped a lot of women in your situation. I'm not in any situation, Sarah said automatically. Sarah. Dr. Brennan's voice was firm but gentle. I've been an emergency room doctor for 23 years. I know what domestic violence looks like. The pattern of bruising, the way you flinch when anyone moves too fast. The fact that your husband hasn't left your bedside but won't let you speak to nurses alone. She paused. And I know how hard it is to ask for help, but you don't have to do this alone. Before Sarah could respond, the door opened. Marcus walked in, carrying a massive bouquet of white roses. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying. Sarah, sweetheart, he said, his voice breaking. I've been so worried. He set the flowers down and took her hand. The doctors told me about the baby. I'm devastated. We both are. Dr. Brennan's jaw tightened, but she nodded professionally. Mr. Whitfield, I need to discuss your wife's care. She'll need to stay here for at least 24 hours for observation. There was significant internal bleeding that we've stabilized, but we need to monitor her closely. Of course, Marcus said. Whatever she needs. Money is no object. I'll give you two some privacy, Dr. Brennan said. As she passed Sarah's bed, she squeezed her hand briefly. The card was still clutched in Sarah's palm, hidden from Marcus's view. When the doctor left, Marcus's expression changed. The grief disappeared, replaced by a cold anger. This is your fault, he hissed, leaning close. You tried to leave. You stressed yourself out. You killed our baby. You pushed me, Sarah said, her voice barely audible. I didn't push you. You fell, and if you tell anyone otherwise, I'll make sure you regret it. He stroked her hair, the gesture almost tender. The media is already here. By the way, cameras outside. Everyone wants to know about the tragic accident that took our baby. Accident, Sarah repeated numbly. That's right, a tragic accident. You slipped on the stairs. I called for help immediately. I'm the devastated husband. He smiled. And you're going to confirm that story, because if you don't, I'll destroy what's left of your pathetic life. Sarah closed her eyes. Tears leaked from the corners. Marcus kissed her forehead. I love you, he said, loud enough for any nurses passing by to hear. We'll get through this together. Over the next hours, visitors came and went. Tech Vista employees bringing flowers. Board members expressing condolences. A reporter who somehow got past security, asking about the tragedy. Each time, Marcus played his role perfectly. The grieving husband, the supportive partner, the man whose world had been shattered. Sarah said nothing. She lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling hollow. That night, after Marcus finally left, claiming he needed to handle some urgent business calls, Sarah unfolded the card Dr. Brennan had given her. Grace Novak, attorney at law, specializing in family law and domestic violence. There was a phone number, an address, an email. Sarah stared at it for a long time. Then she pressed the call button for the nurse. A young woman appeared. Yes, Miss Bennett. Could I borrow a phone? Mine isn't working. The nurse hesitated. Your husband said you needed rest. No phone calls. Please, Sarah whispered. It's important. Something in her voice must have registered. The nurse glanced at the door, then pulled out her personal cell phone. Make it quick, Sarah dialed with shaking fingers. The phone rang twice. Grace Novak speaking. Dr. Brennan gave me your number, Sarah said quickly. My name is Sarah Bennett. My husband pushed me down the stairs. I lost my baby, and I need help. There was a pause. Then Grace's voice, steady and strong. Where are you, Dean? Boston General, room 417. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't talk to anyone until I arrive. And Sarah, Grace paused. You did the right thing by calling. Sarah hung up and handed the phone back to the nurse. Thank you. The nurse squeezed her hand. Be strong, honey. 28 minutes later, Grace Novak walked into Sarah's hospital room. She was in her 40s, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. She wore a navy suit and carried a leather briefcase. Sarah Bennett, she asked. Sarah nodded. Grace closed the door and sat down. I'm going to ask you some direct questions. I need honest answers. Can you do that? Yes. Did your husband push you behind my ass? Yes. Has he hurt you before? Not physically, not until that night, but he's been controlling me for months. He took my money, my car, my phone. He isolated me from my friends. Grace pulled out a legal pad and started writing. That's called coercive control. It's a recognized form of domestic abuse in Massachusetts. Combined with the physical assault, we have a strong case. A case for what? A restraining order, potentially criminal charges, indefinitely divorce. Grace looked up. I know this is overwhelming. You just lost your baby. You're traumatized. But the window for getting evidence is closing fast. Hospital photos of your injuries will be crucial. Dr. Brennan's testimony will help. But we need to act now, before your husband can control the narrative. Sarah felt something stir inside her. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Determination. What do I need to do? Sita, Grace smiled. First, we document everything. Photos, medical records, written statement. Then, tomorrow when you're discharged, you don't go home with him. You go to a domestic violence shelter. We file for an emergency restraining order, and we start building the case to make sure he never touches you again. For the first time since the fall, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Okay, she said. Let's do it. Grace squeezed her hand. You're not alone anymore. Sarah, I've got you. At midnight, after Grace had left with a folder full of documentation, Sarah lay in the dark hospital room. Her body ached. Her heart was broken. But for the first time in months, she felt a small flicker of power. She'd asked for help, and someone had answered. Tomorrow, the fight would begin. Sarah's discharge day arrived with gray skies and rain. She sat on the edge of the hospital bed, dressed in sweatpants and a Tech Vista hoodie that a nurse had found in the Lost and Found. Her designer clothes from the night of the fall had been covered in blood, thrown away. Grace had arrived early with the plan. I've arranged a bed at Safe Haven, a domestic violence shelter in Cambridge. They have 24-hour security. Marcus won't be able to find you there. What about the restraining order? We'll file for it this afternoon. Emergency hearing tomorrow morning. Grace handed her a folder. I've already contacted Detective Rachel Torres. She heads the domestic violence unit. She wants to interview you. Sarah's hands trembled as she took the folder. This was really happening. She was leaving Marcus. She was fighting back. Sarah. Both women turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, flanked by two men in expensive suits. His expression was concerned, loving. The perfect husband mask was firmly in place. Who's this? Marcus asked, looking at Grace. Grace Novak. I'm Sarah's attorney. Attorney, though? Marcus laughed. Sweetheart, why do you need an attorney? I'm taking you home. We're going to heal together. Sarah's not going home with you. Mr. Whitfield, Grace said. Marcus's smile tightened. This is ridiculous. Sarah, tell them you want to come home. Sarah opened her mouth, but one of Marcus's lawyers stepped forward. Miss Novak, I'm Richard Palmer, Mr. Whitfield's counsel. We have concerns about Mrs. Whitfield's mental state. Grace stiffened. Excuse me. Palmer pulled out documents. Over the past week, Sarah has exhibited erratic behavior, paranoid accusations, attempting to leave the house in the middle of the night. According to Mr. Whitfield, she may be experiencing postpartum psychosis. She wasn't postpartum, Grace snapped. She lost the baby. Exactly. Traumatic loss combined with pregnancy hormones can cause severe psychological distress. We've consulted with Dr. Howard Klein, a leading psychiatrist. He's recommended a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Sarah's blood went cold. What? Marcus moved closer. Baby, I'm worried about you. You've been saying things that don't make sense, accusing me of hurting you. The doctor said you fell. You're lying, Sarah said, but her voice shook. See? Palmer gestured. Agitation, paranoia. Classic signs. Grace stepped between them. This is absurd. Sarah is of sound mind. She has the right to refuse psychiatric treatment. Actually, Palmer said, pulling out more papers. Massachusetts law allows for involuntary commitment if a person poses a danger to themselves. Given Sarah's recent trauma, her suicide risk is significant. I'm not suicidal, Sarah said desperately. 2 nurses documented that you were crying uncontrollably. You refused sleeping medication. You told one nurse you couldn't go on like this. Sarah's mind raced. Yes, she'd cried. She'd lost her baby, but not because she wanted to die, because she couldn't go on living with Marcus. Palmer was twisting everything. This is coercion, Grace said. You're using the system to silence a domestic violence victim. We're protecting a vulnerable woman. Palmer handed papers to Grace. Involuntary commitment orders, signed by Dr. Klein. Sarah will be transferred to Meadowbrook Psychiatric Facility. No, Sarah whispered. No, please. Marcus took her hand, his grip gentle but his eyes hard. It's for your own good. 2 security guards entered. Ma'am, we have orders to escort you to the psychiatric ward. This is illegal, Grace protested. I'm filing an emergency motion. File whatever you want, Palmer said. But unless you can get a judge to overturn Dr. Klein's medical opinion in the next 10 minutes, Sarah is going to Meadowbrook. Sarah looked at Grace, terror flooding her. Don't let them do this. Grace's face was anguished. I'll fight this. Sarah, I promise. I'll have you out as soon as I can. No, Sarah tried to stand, but the guards moved forward, guiding her toward a wheelchair. Marcus leaned down, his lips near her ear. Enjoy your vacation. And when you come out, if you even think about telling anyone what really happened, I'll have you committed again. Permanently. The elevator doors closed. Sarah watched Grace's anguished face disappear. Meadowbrook Psychiatric Facility was 40 minutes outside Boston. It looked like a college campus from the outside, but inside it was a prison. Sarah was processed like a criminal, strips searched, belongings confiscated. Given hospital scrubs, a nurse took her blood pressure and asked if she wanted to hurt herself. No, Sarah said numbly. I want to leave. You'll be evaluated by Dr. Klein tomorrow. Until then, try to rest. They put Sarah in a shared room with a woman who rocked back and forth, muttering about angels. Sarah sat on the hard bed, hugging her knees. This was how Marcus was destroying her. Not with his fists, with the system itself. A nurse came with medication. This will help you sleep. I don't want it. Doctor's orders. You can take it voluntarily, or we can give you an injection. Sarah took the pills. Within minutes, the world went fuzzy. I'm not crazy, she whispered. I'm not. 3 days stretched into 7. Sarah learned Meadowbrook's rhythms quickly. Wake at 6. Breakfast. Group therapy where she was expected to share her delusions. More medication. Lunch. Recreation in a courtyard surrounded by 15-foot walls. Dinner. Evening medication. Lights out at 9. She met with Dr. Klein twice. He was thin with wire-rimmed glasses and a condescending smile. Walk me through your marriage, Klein said. Every time Sarah explained Marcus's abuse, Klein would make notes and say, do you have evidence of this alleged abuse? The hospital photos. Dr. Brennan's testimony. Dr. Brennan noted injuries consistent with a fall. She didn't witness any abuse. Because it happened at home. Sarah, I understand you're grieving. It's natural to look for someone to blame. I'm not making this up. But trauma can distort memories. Your mind might be creating a narrative to help you cope. Sarah wanted to scream, but any emotional display was used as evidence of instability. On her 4th day, a nurse called her to the common room phone. You have a call. Sarah's heart leaped. Grace with news about getting her out, but it was Marcus's lawyer. Mrs. Whitfield, this is Richard Palmer. I'm calling to inform you that your mother, Patricia Bennett, passed away yesterday evening. Heart attack. The funeral is Saturday. The world tilted. What? I'm very sorry for your loss. Of course, given your current situation, you won't be able to attend. My mother is dead. Sarah's voice rose. I'm very sorry, Ma. If there's anything Mr. Whitfield can do. Sarah dropped the phone. A nurse rushed over. You need to calm down. My mother's dead. I need to go to her funeral. We can discuss that with Dr. Klein. But Klein was unmoved. Given your current state, attending a funeral would be inadvisable. Too much stress. It's my mother. She wouldn't want you to risk your mental health. He made another note. I'm extending your evaluation another 72 hours. That night, Sarah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her baby was gone. Her mother was gone. Her freedom was gone. Marcus had taken everything. She felt something inside her break. The part that still believed in fairness, in justice. The next morning, Sarah knew what she had to do. I think I understand now, Sarah said to Klein. The fall was an accident. I was stressed and not thinking clearly. I shouldn't have accused Marcus. Klein smiled. That's progress, Sarah. When can I go home? Let's give it another day or two. 3 days later, Sarah was released. Grace waited in the parking lot, furious. I tried everything, Grace said as Sarah got into her car. Motions, calls to judges, threatened lawsuits, but they claimed you were a danger to yourself. I know. It's okay. It's not okay, and this was abuse of the psychiatric system. I just want to leave. Can you take me to safe haven? As they drove, Grace explained what she'd missed. Marcus had held a press conference about his wife's mental health crisis. Tech Vista stock had actually gone up. He's made himself look like a saint, Grace said bitterly. At Safe Haven, a staff member showed Sarah to a small room with twin beds and a shared bathroom. You'll be safe here. No one can find you. Sarah nodded, safe, but as she lay on the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to other women crying through thin walls, Sarah didn't feel safe. She felt broken. Sarah spent her first week at Safe Haven in a daze. She attended mandatory group therapy sessions where women shared stories that made her own seem almost tame. She met with Grace, who was preparing their legal strategy. She tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her every time she closed her eyes. On day 8, Grace arrived with news that made Sarah's stomach drop. Marcus emptied your joint bank accounts, Grace said, spreading papers across the small table in Safe Haven's conference room. Every penny, $240,000, gone. He can't do that, Sarah said weakly. Actually, he can. They were joint accounts. Legally, he had every right. Oh, Grace's jaw was tight with anger. He also canceled your health insurance, withdrew you from his life insurance policy as beneficiary, and terminated your membership at the country club. He's systematically erasing you from his life. What about my mother's estate? There must be something, Grace hesitated. That's another problem. Your mother's will left everything to you, but it has to go through probate, which takes months. And Marcus's lawyers are already filing motions to claim part of it, arguing that marital assets were used to support your mother in her final years. Sarah's head spun. Can they do that? They can try. Whether they'll succeed is another question. Grace paused. Sarah, I need to be honest with you. This is going to be a long, expensive fight, and you currently have zero income and zero assets. So I've lost before I've even started. No, Grace leaned forward. We have a strong case. The hospital photos, Dr. Brennan's testimony, the pattern of coercive control. But we need Marcus to make a mistake. And men like him always do. That afternoon, Sarah met with Detective Rachel Torres. The detective was in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. They met at a police station near Safe Haven. Walk me through the night of the assault, Torres said, her pen poised over a notepad. Sarah told the story again. The argument, the stairs, the push, the blood. Torres listened without interrupting. When Sarah finished, the detective leaned back. Here's the problem. You told hospital staff it was an accident. You didn't report it to police that night. And Marcus called 911, which makes him look like the concerned husband. Because I was terrified, Sarah said. I still am. I believe you, but belief isn't evidence. Torres pulled out photos, the ones taken at the hospital showing Sarah's bruises. These help. Dr. Brennan's statement helps, but a defense attorney will argue these injuries are consistent with a fall. What about the handprint on my arm? Could have happened when Marcus tried to catch you as you fell. That's how his lawyer will spin it. Torres sighed. Look, I'm not saying we don't have a case. I'm saying it's circumstantial. We need something concrete. An admission, a witness, recorded threats. He threatened me at the hospital, Sarah said. And at Meadowbrook. Were there witnesses? No, he's too smart for that. Torres nodded. That's the pattern with guys like Whitfield. They're meticulous. But here's what I've learned in 15 years doing this work. They always slip up. Usually because their ego gets in the way. She handed Sarah a card. If he contacts you, record it. Massachusetts is a one-party consent state. You can record any conversation you're part of without telling him. I don't have a phone. He took mine. Torres pulled a burner phone from her desk drawer. Use this. It's prepaid. My number's already programmed in. Call me day or night. Sarah took the phone, feeling a small spark of hope. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we put him away. 2 days later, Sarah's fragile sense of hope shattered completely. She was called to the safe haven office. Grace was there, her expression grim. What's wrong? Sarah asked. I got a call from the medical examiner's office. They're ruling your mother's death as natural causes. Stress-induced heart attack. But they found something else. Grace paused. Your mother had been trying to contact you for weeks before she died. She called your cell phone 47 times. She left voicemails. She even came to your house twice. Sarah felt sick. I never got any calls because Marcus blocked her number. And when she came to the house, he told her you didn't want to see her, that you were cutting off your family. No, Sarah whispered. No, I would never. I know, but your mother didn't. She died thinking you'd abandoned her. The grief hit Sarah like a tidal wave. She doubled over, sobbing. Grace held her, murmuring reassurances, but nothing helped. Her mother had died alone, thinking Sarah didn't love her, and it was Marcus's fault. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Sarah realized something. Grace had mentioned 3 separate ways Marcus was destroying her money, her mother, and now she couldn't shake the feeling there was a third blow coming. The next morning, Grace confirmed her fears. I got the full medical report from your hospital stay, Grace said, her voice careful. Sarah, there's something you need to know. The injuries you sustained, the internal bleeding, it caused severe damage to your uterus. The doctors had to perform an emergency procedure to save your life. Sarah's breath caught. What kind of procedure? They removed your right ovary and fallopian tube. The left side is damaged too. Grace took Sarah's hand. Sarah, the doctors don't think you'll be able to carry a pregnancy again. The words didn't make sense at first. Then they hit. She couldn't have children. Ever. Marcus hadn't just taken her baby. He'd taken her ability to ever have another one. Sarah felt something shatter deep inside her. A scream built in her throat. But when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Grace wrapped her arms around her. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That night, Sarah stood in the bathroom at Safe Haven, staring at her reflection. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Hollow eyes, gaunt cheeks, broken spirit. In the span of 2 weeks, she'd lost her baby, her mother, her ability to have children, her money, her home, her dignity. Marcus had systematically destroyed every part of her life. And he'd done it all while looking like the victim. Sarah picked up the burner phone Detective Torres had given her. She scrolled through the contacts. Just one number. Torres. She could call, report suicidal thoughts, get herself admitted somewhere, medicated into numbness, or she could fight. Sarah set down the phone. She looked at her reflection again. You're still here, she whispered. That means something. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get through one more night. Tomorrow, she would figure out the next step. Tonight, she would survive. Sarah woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her safe haven room. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality crashed back. But something was different. The crushing despair of the previous night had transformed into something harder. Anger. Marcus had taken everything, but he hadn't killed her. And that was his mistake. Sarah got dressed and found Grace in Safe Haven's small office, surrounded by legal documents and coffee cups. I need to fight back, Sarah said without preamble. Grace looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Okay, how so? I don't know yet, but I'm done being his victim. Sarah sat down. What are my options? Over the next hour, Grace outlined their P-Wayne strategy. They'd file for divorce immediately, request emergency spousal support, pursue criminal charges for assault, sue for damages related to Sarah's injuries and medical expenses. It's going to be ugly, Grace warned. Marcus will fight every step. His lawyers are expensive and ruthless. Good. Sarah's voice was steel. Let them fight. I'm not backing down. That afternoon, they filed the divorce papers. Within hours, Marcus's response came through his attorneys, a counterclaim, alleging that Sarah had been an unfaithful, unstable spouse who'd caused her own injuries through reckless behavior. Standard smear tactics, Grace said, reading through the response. They're trying to destroy your credibility before we even get to court. What about the criminal case? Sarah asked. Detective Torres is building it, but she needs more evidence. As if on cue, Sarah's burner phone rang. It was Torres. I've been digging into Whitfield's background, Torres said, and I found something interesting. He's done this before. Sarah's heart raced. What do you mean by Marcus had a girlfriend in college. Allegations of physical abuse. She filed a restraining order, then dropped it suddenly, took a cash settlement and signed an NDA. Can we contact her? I already did. She won't talk. Too scared of legal retaliation. Torres paused. But here's the thing. If he's done it twice, he's probably done it more. I'm searching for other victims. If we can establish a pattern, it strengthens your case significantly. After the call, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't alone. There were other women. If she could find them, convince them to come forward, maybe they could bring Marcus down to them. Over the next week, Sarah threw herself into the fight. She attended support groups at Safe Haven, learning strategies for dealing with trauma. She met with a therapist who specialized in domestic violence recovery. She worked with Grace on legal documents, poring over every detail of the prenup and Marcus's financial statements. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Sarah started to feel like herself again. One evening, Sarah was in Safe Haven's common room when another resident approached her. The woman was in her early 40s, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. You're Sarah Bennett, right? The woman asked. The one married to Marcus Whitfield. Sarah tensed. Yes. I'm Kelly Murphy. I saw you on the news, the charity gala, before everything happened. Kelly sat down. I was married to a man like yours. CEO, charming in public, monster in private. He put me in the hospital 3 times before I finally left. I'm sorry, Sarah said. Don't be. I got out. And so will you. Kelly leaned forward. I know it feels impossible right now, but you're stronger than you think. The fact that you're here, fighting back, that takes courage. Those words meant more to Sarah than anything Grace or the therapists had said, because Kelly understood. She'd lived it. How long did it take, Sarah asked, to feel normal again? Kelly smiled sadly. I'll let you know when I get there, but every day gets a little easier. The nightmares fade. The fear loosens its grip. You learn to trust yourself again. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Kelly's words, about other women who'd survived, about the strength it took to rebuild a life after someone tried to destroy it. Around midnight, Sarah's burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Tyler Harding, Marcus's business partner. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Coffee Bean on Cambridge Street. Come alone. Sarah stared at the message. Tyler Harding. She remembered him from Tech Vista events. Quiet, serious, always in Marcus's shadow. Why would he want to meet? She texted back, how did you get this number? The response came quickly. Detective Torres gave it to me. I have information about Marcus. Things you need to know. Sarah's pulse quickened. She forwarded the messages to Torres, who called immediately. I gave him your number, Torres confirmed. Harding reached out to me yesterday. Says he has evidence of Whitfield's financial crimes, but he'll only talk to you. Why me? He didn't say, but I think we should take the meeting. I'll have undercover officers nearby. The next morning, Sarah walked into Coffee Bean with her stomach in knots. Tyler Harding sat in a corner booth, nursing an espresso. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. "Sarah," he said as she approached. "Thank you for coming." She sat down across from him. "What's this about?" Tyler glanced around nervously, then pulled out a flash drive. "This contains evidence that Marcus has been embezzling from TechVista for years. Offshore accounts, fake vendors, fraudulent expenses. Millions of dollars." Sarah's eyes widened. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I can't live with it anymore." Tyler's voice cracked. "I've known about the embezzlement for 2 years. Marcus threatened me, said if he told anyone, he'd destroy my family. I have a wife, 2 kids. I was too scared to speak up." "What changed, you?" Tyler met her eyes. "When I heard what he did to you, how he blamed you for falling, how he had you committed, I realized I was complicit. By staying silent, I enabled him." He pushed the flash drive across the table. "This is my confession. Everything I know. Give it to the police, the SEC, whoever will listen." Sarah picked up the flash drive, her hands trembling. "This could send him to prison." "Good. He belongs there." After Tyler left, Sarah sat alone in the coffee shop, holding the flash drive. This was it. Real evidence. Concrete proof of Marcus's crimes. She called Grace immediately. "We need to move fast," Grace said after Sarah explained. "If Marcus finds out Tyler talked, he'll destroy evidence. I'm calling the district attorney right now." Within hours, a meeting was arranged. Sarah, Grace, Detective Torres, and an assistant district attorney named Jessica Cameron sat in a conference room at the DA's office. "This is substantial," Cameron said, reviewing the documents from Tyler's flash drive. "If we can verify these transactions, we have enough for fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion charges." "What about the assault case?" Sarah asked. "That's still in progress, but this gives us leverage. Whitfield might take a plea deal if he's facing multiple felonies." Torres leaned forward. "We need to move before he lawyers up and starts destroying evidence. I recommend we execute search warrants on his home and office immediately." Cameron nodded. "I'll have warrants drawn up by end of day. We move tomorrow morning." As Sarah left the DA's office, she felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. Real, tangible hope. But she'd learned the hard way that hope could be dangerous. Marcus always seemed one step ahead. That night, Sarah's burner phone rang again. Unknown number. "Hello," Sarah answered cautiously. Sarah Bennett, a woman's voice, nervous and young. "Yes, who is this? My name is Natalie Morrison. I'm Marcus Whitfield's executive assistant." The woman paused. "I need to meet with you tonight. It's urgent." Sarah's heart raced. "What is this about?" "I have recordings, conversations between Marcus and his lawyers, planning how to destroy you, admitting to the assault, everything." Natalie's voice dropped to a whisper. "But if he finds out I'm talking to you, I'm dead." Sarah closed her eyes. Another witness, another piece of evidence. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally going to win. Sarah met Natalie Morrison at a 24-hour diner in Somerville at 11 p.m. Grace and Detective Torres came with her, sitting in a booth nearby but giving the women space to talk. Natalie was 25, blonde, professionally dressed despite the late hour. She looked terrified. "Thank you for meeting me," Natalie said, clutching a leather portfolio. "I know this is dangerous, but I couldn't stay silent anymore." "How long have you worked for Marcus?" Sarah asked. 3 years. I started right out of college." Natalie opened the portfolio, revealing a tablet. For the first year, everything seemed normal. Marcus was demanding, but professional. Then things changed. He became paranoid, controlling. He made me spy on employees, lie to board members, cover up his affairs. Affairs. Sarah's stomach twisted. Multiple. He kept a second apartment in the Seaport district, brought women there. Natalie pulled up photos on her tablet. "But that's not the worst part." She turned the tablet towards Sarah. It showed a text message thread between Marcus and someone named Richard Palmer, his lawyer. "Marcus, Sarah's in psych ward. How long can we keep her there?" Palmer, "Klein will stretch it to 7-10 days. Longer if she has any emotional outbursts." Marcus, "Perfect. Gives me time to liquidate assets. She'll have nothing when she gets out." Palmer, What about criminal charges from the assault? Marcus' hospital photos show fall injuries. Dr. Brennan suspects abuse but can't prove it. My word against Sarah's, and I've already established she's mentally unstable. Sarah felt sick reading the cold calculation in Marcus's words. He'd planned everything. There's more, Natalie said, swiping to audio files. I recorded conversations. Massachusetts is one-party consent, so it's legal. She pressed play. Marcus's voice filled the small diner booth. The best part about marrying Sarah, she trusted me completely, signed everything I put in front of her. That prenup is airtight. She'll leave with nothing. And I keep my kid, another voice, Palmer. Except she lost the baby. Marcus laughed. Even better. No custody battles. Clean break, though I'll publicly play the grieving husband. Great PR. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Grace, who'd moved closer to listen, looked furious. This is it, Grace said. This is the evidence we need. Natalie pulled out a second device. This one is his admission about the assault. I recorded it 2 days after it happened. He was bragging to a friend. She played the audio. Marcus, Sarah actually tried to leave me. Can you believe it? Packed a bag like she had anywhere to go. Yeah, well, unknown male voice. What did you do, Marcus? Taught her a lesson? Gave her a little push? She fell down a few stairs. Male voice was laughing. Shit, man, is she okay, Marcus? She lost the baby, which works out. I didn't really want to be a father anyway. Too much responsibility. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face, the casual cruelty in his voice, the complete lack of remorse. It was confirmation of everything she'd known but couldn't prove. Detective Torres came over, her expression grim. Natalie, are you willing to testify about these recordings to verify their authenticity? Natalie nodded, though her hands shook. Yes, my sister was in an abusive relationship. She got out, but barely. When I saw what Marcus did to Sarah, I knew I had to do something. This changes everything, Torres said. With Tyler Harding's financial evidence and Natalie's recordings, we can bring charges for assault, witness intimidation, fraud, possibly more. Over the next 3 days, everything moved quickly. The DA's office filed formal charges. Search warrants were executed on Marcus's home and Tech Vista offices. Federal agents seized computers, files, offshore account records. Marcus was arrested at a Tech Vista board meeting. Sarah watched the news coverage from Safe Haven's common room. Marcus, in handcuffs, being let out of the building while cameras flashed, his lawyers surrounding him, shouting no comment. For the first time in months, Sarah felt vindication. We did it, Grace said, standing beside her. He's going to face justice. The trial was set for 6 weeks later. In the interim, Marcus was released on bail but required to wear an ankle monitor and stay away from Sarah. The media exploded with coverage. Tech Vista's stock plummeted. Board members distanced themselves. Marcus's carefully constructed image crumbled. Sarah moved out of Safe Haven into a small apartment Grace helped her find. She started seeing her therapist twice a week. She attended support groups. Slowly, carefully, she began rebuilding her life. The trial began on a cold November morning. Sarah sat in the courtroom gallery beside Grace, watching as jury selection proceeded. Marcus sat at the defense table with his team of lawyers, looking confident despite the charges. Over the next 2 weeks, the prosecution built their case. Tyler Harding testified about the financial crimes. Natalie played the recordings, her voice steady despite Marcus's glares. Dr. Brennan testified about Sarah's injuries. Detective Torres walked the jury through the evidence timeline. And finally, Sarah took the stand. Miss Bennett, the prosecutor said, tell the jury what happened on the night of August 15th. Sarah took a deep breath. Then she told her story. All of it. The abuse, the control, the assault, the loss of her baby. She spoke clearly, making eye contact with the jurors. When she described Marcus pushing her, several jurors looked at him with disgust. Marcus's lawyer tried to shake her during cross-examination. Isn't it true, Miss Bennett, that you were hospitalized for psychiatric issues? I was involuntarily committed by my husband as part of his campaign to silence me, Sarah replied calmly. But you initially told hospital staff the fall was an accident. Because I was terrified, my baby was dying, and my husband was standing there threatening me. Do you have any proof of these alleged threats? I have recordings of him admitting to the assault and bragging about it afterward. The lawyer's confident expression faltered. By the end of testimony, Sarah felt exhausted but hopeful. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury looked sympathetic. Even the judge seemed moved by the testimony. Closing arguments tomorrow, Grace said as they left the courthouse. Then jury deliberation. This is almost over. Sarah? That night, Sarah allowed herself to believe it. Justice was finally within reach. The next morning, Sarah woke early and dressed carefully for court. Today would be the last day of testimony. Soon, Marcus would be convicted. She'd be free. But when she arrived at the courthouse, Grace was waiting outside with a devastating expression. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked. "Mistrial," Grace said, her voice hollow. "The judge just declared a mistrial." Sarah's world tilted. "What, why? Technical issue with how the search warrant was executed. Marcus's lawyers argued the evidence from his office was obtained illegally. Judge agreed. Without that evidence, the financial crimes case falls apart. And without Tyler's testimony connecting to that evidence, huge holes appear in the assault case too. But what about Natalie's recordings, my testimony? Still admissible, but the defense is arguing the recordings could be edited or taken out of context. And your testimony, without corroborating physical evidence linking Marcus directly to the assault, becomes, she said, Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. The judge is dismissing the case. Marcus walks free." Sarah couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. They'd had him. The evidence was overwhelming. "Can we appeal?" Sarah whispered. "There's nothing to appeal. Mistrial means the case is dead. The DA could refile, but with the warrant issue, they'd have to rebuild from scratch. And that could take years." Inside the courtroom, Sarah watched in numb horror as the judge made the announcement official. The jury was dismissed. Charges were dropped. Marcus stood up, smoothing at his suit, jacket and all. He turned and looked directly at Sarah. His smile was triumphant. He'd won. Sarah felt her knees buckle. Grace caught her, holding her up. Around them, reporters shouted questions. Marcus's lawyers made statements about justice prevailing and false accusations. Sarah heard none of it. All she heard was the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and painful in her ears. She'd lost everything, and Marcus had lost nothing. The days after the mistrial blurred together. Sarah stopped going to therapy, stopped eating, spent hours staring at the walls of her small apartment. Grace called constantly, trying to rally her. "We can sue civilly. We can petition for new criminal charges. This isn't over." But Sarah couldn't hear her anymore. Something inside her had broken during that moment in the courtroom when the judge dismissed the case. She'd done everything right, reported the upon, gathered evidence, testified, and Marcus still won. What was the point on the fifth night after the mistrial? Sarah stood in her bathroom, holding a bottle of sleeping pills. She'd been prescribed them for insomnia, but she'd barely taken any. The bottle was full. It would be easy. Swallow them all. Go to sleep. Finally have peace. She opened the bottle, poured the pills into her palm. Her phone rang. Sarah ignored it, but it kept ringing. Finally, she checked the caller ID. Kelly Murphy, the woman from Safe Haven. Sarah almost didn't answer, but something made her press the button. "Hello. Sarah, it's Kelly. I saw the news about the mistrial. I wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," Sarah lied. "No, you're not. I know exactly where you are right now." "Sarah, I've been there. After my third time in the hospital, I stood in my bathroom with a razor blade, ready to end it." Sarah's grip tightened on the pills. "What stopped you?" "My therapist told me something. She said the day you decide to die is the day your abuser finally wins. Because they didn't just take your body, your money, your dignity. They took your future, all the years you could have lived, all the happiness you could have found." Kelly's voice softened. "Don't let him have that. Sarah, don't let him win." Sarah looked at the pills in her hand. Tears streamed down her face. "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I know, but tired isn't the same as done. You survived the worst thing that could happen to you. You're still here. That means something." After they hung up, Sarah stood there for a long time. Then, slowly, she poured the pills down the toilet. She watched them dissolve and disappear. She wasn't okay, but she was alive. The next morning, Sarah called Grace. "I want to fight back. Not legally. Differently." What do you mean Marcus won because of money and power and lawyers? But there's another way to hold him accountable. Public opinion. Grace was quiet for a moment. You want to go public? I want to tell my story. Everything. The abuse, the assault, the mistrial. I want people to know who he really is. Sarah, that's risky. Marcus will sue for defamation. Let him. He can't defame me more than he already has. And if my story helps one other woman recognize the signs of abuse and leave before it's too late, it's worth it. Grace paused, then said, Okay, I know a journalist, Patricia Walsh from the Boston Chronicle. She specializes in investigative pieces on domestic violence and corporate corruption. If anyone can tell your story right, it's her. 3 days later, Sarah sat in Patricia Walsh's office. The journalist was in her 50s, with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. I'll be honest, Patricia said. Your story is powerful, but Marcus Whitfield has a team of lawyers who will try to bury this piece. We need ironclad evidence. I have recordings, testimony transcripts, medical records, everything on. Patricia reviewed the documents Sarah provided, her expression growing increasingly serious. This is damning, but I need to verify everything independently. Talk to sources, confirm timelines. It'll take about 2 weeks. I'll wait, Sarah said. Over those 2 weeks, Sarah also worked with Detective Torres on one more angle. Tyler Harding and Natalie Morrison's testimony wasn't enough for criminal court, Torres explained. But the SEC is investigating TechVista separately. Financial fraud doesn't require the same burden of proof. If they can prove Marcus embezzled funds, he'll face federal charges. How long will that take? Months, maybe a year, but it's a path forward. The article published on a Wednesday morning. The headline read, The Perfect Husband, How Tech CEO Marcus Whitfield Used Wealth and Power to Abuse. Then silence. His wife. The piece was devastating. Patricia had interviewed Natalie, Tyler, Dr. Brennan, even Kelly Murphy, who spoke about recognizing the signs of abuse in Sarah's story. The article included excerpts from the recordings, photos of Sarah's injuries, and a detailed timeline of Marcus's campaign to destroy her. Within hours, the article went viral. Social media exploded. TechVista's stock crashed. Board members called emergency meetings. Marcus issued a statement through his lawyers denying everything, threatening lawsuits. But the damage was done. That afternoon, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously. Miss Bennett, this is Catherine Wells. I'm a judge in Boston Family Court. I read Patricia Walsh's article. I wanted you to know that several other women have come forward with similar stories about Whitfield. We're investigating historical restraining orders and settlements that may have been covered up. Sarah's breath caught. Other women, at least 4 that we know of so far. Your courage in speaking out has given them courage too. After the call, Sarah sat on her small apartment balcony, watching the sunset over Boston. 4 other women, 4 other victims who'd been silenced. But they were silent no more. Over the next week, more revelations emerged. A college girlfriend who'd been hospitalized after falling downstairs. A former employee who'd been sexually harassed and paid to stay quiet. A woman who'd dated Marcus briefly and ended up in a psychiatric facility after he convinced her doctors she was unstable. The pattern was undeniable. The SEC accelerated their investigation. Federal prosecutors took interest. The Massachusetts Attorney General opened a probe into whether Marcus had committed crimes related to coercive control under new state laws. Marcus's empire was crumbling, not because of one big case, but because of the accumulated weight of truth. Grace called with unexpected news. The TechVista board voted Marcus out. They're cooperating with federal investigators. His assets are being frozen pending the SEC investigation. Does that mean, Sarah started? It means he's losing everything he used to control you. The money, the power, the protection. He's just a man now. A man who's going to face consequences. That night, Sarah's burner phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Marcus is at his second apartment. He's been drinking. Erratic. I'm worried he might do something. Sarah forwarded the message to Detective Torres, who responded immediately. Officers en route. Stay away from him. But 40 minutes later, Torres called. It's over. Sarah, Marcus tried to flee. We caught him at the airport with fake ID and $2 million in cash. Federal charges for obstruction and flight risk. He's being held without bail this time." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling something release in her chest. Not relief, exactly, but something close to it. "Thank you, Wicca," she whispered. "You did this," Torres said. "You refused to stay silent. You saved yourself and probably dozens of other women." After they hung up, Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 months ago. Naive, trusting, trapped. She wasn't that woman anymore. She'd been broken, yes, shattered into pieces, but she was still here, still fighting, and maybe, just maybe, she was starting to rebuild herself into something stronger. 6 months after Marcus's arrest, Sarah sat in a small office in downtown Boston. The sign on the door read Sarah's Voice Foundation, supporting survivors of domestic violence. The civil settlement from Tech Vista had come through. $12 million in damages for what Marcus had done. Sarah had used half of it to fund this nonprofit, coming full circle to her roots in helping others. Grace knocked on the doorframe. "Your 2 o'clock is here. Victoria Grant. She's ready to talk about pressing charges against her ex." Sarah smiled. "Send her in." The work was hard. Every woman who walked through the door carried trauma that Sarah understood too intimately, but helping them navigate the legal system, connect with resources, find their strength, it gave Sarah purpose. The federal case against Marcus had been conclusive. Embezzlement, tax evasion, obstruction of justice. He'd been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, no chance of early parole, and separately, the Massachusetts Attorney General had successfully prosecuted him under new coercive control laws, another 5 years, to be served consecutively. Marcus Whitfield wouldn't see freedom until he was in his 60s. Sarah's therapist had warned her that she shouldn't expect closure from his imprisonment. "Healing doesn't come from his punishment," Dr. Lisa Rodriguez had said. "It comes from rebuilding your own life." She'd been right. Sarah still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden movements, still struggled with trust, but she was healing, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. That evening, Sarah attended a support group at the same safe haven shelter where she'd once stayed. She'd become a regular volunteer, sharing her story to give other women hope. "My name is Sarah," she said to the circle of women, "and 2 years ago, my husband pushed me downstairs when I tried to leave him. I lost my baby. I lost everything I thought made me who I was." The women watched her, some crying, all understanding. "For a long time, I thought that fall destroyed me, that I'd never be whole again." Sarah paused. "But I learned something. The things that break us don't have to define us. Yes, I lost my baby. I can't have children. My mother died without knowing the truth. Those losses will always hurt." She looked around the circle. "But I'm still here, and every day I choose to get up, to help other women, to use my voice. That's a day I win. That's a day he loses." After the session, Kelly Murphy approached her. "You've come so far," Kelly said. "So have you," Sarah replied. Kelly had started dating again, slowly opening her heart to the possibility of love without violence. "I've been thinking," Kelly said, "about what you said during group, using your voice. I want to do that too. I want to testify at legislative hearings about strengthening domestic violence laws." "You'd be amazing at that." They hugged, two survivors supporting each other. Walking home that night, Sarah's phone rang. It was Patricia Walsh, the journalist who'd broken her story. "Sarah, I'm working on a follow-up piece. 2 more women have come forward about Marcus. They want to share their stories too." "That's good," Sarah said. "The more people know the truth, the better." "There's something else. One of Marcus's former business partners reached out. He says there are other tech CEOs operating like Marcus did, using NDAs, intimidation, systemic abuse. He wants to help expose them." Sarah stopped walking. "That could be big. It could change the entire industry, but I need your help. You understand the patterns, the tactics. Would you be willing to consult?" Sarah thought about it. Expanding her fight beyond Marcus, helping other women in other situations. "Yes," she said. I'm in. 3 months later, Patricia's investigation led to congressional hearings on corporate accountability and workplace abuse. Sarah testified alongside a dozen other women. Their collective testimony led to new legislation requiring independent oversight of harassment complaints in companies over a certain size. It wasn't everything, but it was progress. On the anniversary of the night Marcus had pushed her, Sarah visited her mother's grave for the first time. She'd been too broken before, too consumed by survival to properly grieve. "I'm sorry it took so long," Sarah said, placing flowers on the headstone. "I'm sorry for everything he put you through. All the worry, the pain of thinking I'd abandoned you." The wind rustled through the trees. Sarah imagined it was her mother's voice, forgiving her. "I'm okay now, Mom," or "I'm getting there. I'm doing the work we used to dream about, helping women who need it. I think you'd be proud." That evening, Sarah returned to her apartment. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom in Cambridge, but it was hers, paid for with money she'd earned, decorated with furniture she'd chosen. She made dinner, simple pasta with vegetables, ate slowly, savoring each bite, took a bath, read a book, went to bed at a reasonable hour. Normal things, peaceful things, things Marcus had stolen from her, that she'd slowly reclaimed. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she thought about the question her therapist had asked during their last session. "What does victory look like to you?" Sarah had struggled to answer then, but now, lying in her own bed, safe and free, she understood. Victory wasn't Marcus in prison, though that helped. Victory wasn't the settlement money, though it enabled her work. Victory wasn't even the laws that had been changed, though they'd helped countless women. Victory was this: waking up without fear, going through a day without looking over her shoulder, falling asleep knowing no one could hurt her. Victory was survival. And then, gradually, joy. Sarah Bennett had been broken, but she'd refused to stay broken. And that made all the difference. 2 years after Marcus's conviction, Sarah stood backstage at the Boston Convention Center. In 5 minutes, she'd walk onto a stage in front of 1,500 people attending the National Domestic Violence Summit. Her hands trembled slightly as she reviewed her notes. Grace stood beside her, offering silent support. "You've done this a dozen times," Grace said. "You're going to be great." "I know, it's just this one feels bigger somehow." A stage manager approached. "5 minutes, Miss Bennett?" Sarah nodded. She closed her eyes, centering herself, thought about the journey that had brought her here. The voice over the loudspeaker announced her, "Please welcome Sarah Bennett, founder of Sarah's Voice Foundation and survivor advocate." Sarah walked onto the stage to applause. The lights were bright, making it hard to see individual faces in the crowd, but she could feel their attention, their hope. "Thank you for that warm welcome," Sarah began. "My name is Sarah Bennett. 3 years ago, I was married to a man who systematically abused, controlled, and nearly killed me. I lost my baby. I lost my ability to have children. I lost my mother. I lost everything except my life." The room was silent, hanging on every word. "For a long time, I thought that was the end of my story, that I'd be forever defined by what he did to me, forever the victim, forever broken." Sarah paused. "But I learned something crucial. Our abusers don't get to write the ending of our stories. We do." She shared her journey, the hospital, the psychiatric facility, the mistrial, the darkest moments, but also the moments of strength, reaching out for help, refusing to stay silent, rebuilding piece by piece. "The system failed me in many ways," Sarah said. "A technicality let my abuser walk free from criminal charges. For months, I thought that meant he won. But then something shifted. I realized justice isn't always about courtrooms and verdicts. Sometimes justice is simply refusing to let someone else's violence define your future." The audience leaned forward, engaged. Today, the Sarah's Voice Foundation has helped over 300 women leave abusive situations. We've provided legal support, housing assistance, counseling, job training. We've helped 47 women successfully prosecute their abusers. We've pushed for legislative changes that have been adopted in 8 states. Applause rippled through the crowd. But numbers don't capture the real impact. The real impact is the woman who calls our hotline at 2 a.m., terrified but ready to leave. It's the survivor who testifies despite her fear. It's the teenager who learns the warning signs and avoids a dangerous relationship altogether. It's every person who refuses to be silenced. As Sarah's voice grew stronger. If you're currently in an abusive relationship, please hear me. What's happening to you is not your fault. You are not weak for staying. You are not crazy for the things you feel, and you deserve help, safety, and healing. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. And if you're a survivor, further along in your journey, I want you to know something else. The trauma you experienced doesn't have to be the loudest part of your story. Yes, it happened. Yes, it changed you. But you get to decide what comes next. You get to build a life beyond survival. As Sarah spoke, she noticed women in the audience wiping away tears, some nodding in recognition, others holding hands with people beside them. 3 years ago, I stood at the bottom of a staircase, bleeding, my baby dying inside me, and I thought my life was over. I thought he'd won. I thought I'd never feel safe, or whole, or happy again. Her voice caught with emotion. But I was wrong. Because here's what they don't tell you about surviving the abuse. It's not a straight line from victim to survivor to thriver. It's messy. There are setbacks. There are days you feel strong and days you can barely get out of bed. There are moments of victory and moments of crushing defeat. Sarah smiled, genuine and warm. But if you keep going, if you keep choosing yourself, keep asking for help, keep refusing to give up, something remarkable happens. You don't just survive, you transform. The thing that was meant to destroy you becomes the foundation for something stronger, more compassionate, more purposeful than you ever imagined. The applause was thunderous. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, but didn't wipe them away. After her speech, Sarah spent an hour in the lobby, talking with survivors. They shared their stories, asked for advice, thanked her for her courage. Each conversation reminded Sarah why this work mattered. An elderly woman approached, her eyes bright with purpose. "My granddaughter is in an abusive marriage," she said. "She won't leave, says she loves him. I don't know what to do." Sarah took the woman's hands. "The average victim leaves 7 times before leaving permanently. Your granddaughter has to make that choice herself, in her own time, but you can help by being consistent support. Let her know you're there whenever she's ready. Don't judge. Don't give ultimatums. Just love her and believe her." The woman nodded, tears streaming. "Thank you." As the crowd thinned, Grace approached with news. "The prosecutor from Marcus's case just called. He wanted you to know Marcus was denied parole. He'll serve his full sentence." Sarah absorbed the information without the rush of triumph she might have expected 3 years ago. "Good. But honestly, whether he's in prison or not doesn't change my life anymore. I've moved past him." Grace smiled. "That's growth." That evening, Sarah attended a small dinner with other advocates from the summit. The conversation was energizing, full of ideas and strategies for expanding their collective impact. During dessert, her phone buzzed. A text from Natalie Morrison, who'd become a friend, just got promoted to director of HR at a different tech company, first order of business implementing the strongest anti-harassment policies in the industry. "Wish me luck," Sarah replied. "You don't need luck. You've got integrity and courage. That's more powerful." Later, walking back to her hotel, Sarah called Dr. Rodriguez, her therapist. "How'd the speech go?" Rodriguez asked. "Good, really good. Actually, I felt strong up there." "That's because you are strong. You know, when you first came to my office 3 years ago, you could barely make eye contact. You apologized for existing. Now you're speaking to thousands of people, running a foundation, changing laws. That's extraordinary. Some days I still feel like that terrified woman in the hospital bed. And you always will. A little. Trauma doesn't disappear completely. But it also doesn't define you anymore. You've integrated it into a fuller, richer story." After hanging up, Sarah stood on a bridge overlooking the Charles River. The water reflected the city lights, creating patterns of gold and silver. She thought about all the versions of herself she'd been: the naive wife, the terrified victim, the angry survivor, the determined advocate. All of them were real. All of them had gotten her here. Her phone rang one more time. Detective Torres. Sarah, I wanted to let you know, we just arrested another tech CEO on charges similar to Marcus's case. The victim used the Sarah's Voice Foundation handbook to document her abuse. It made our job building the case so much easier. Your work is directly saving lives. Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest. Thank you for telling me. No, thank you for not giving up, for turning your pain into purpose. That night, in her hotel room, Sarah opened her laptop. She'd been working on something private, just for herself, a memoir about her journey. She read through the final chapter she just completed. It ended with these words: people often ask if I've forgiven Marcus for what he did to me. The answer is complicated. I don't forgive what he did. I never will. But I've forgiven myself for not seeing the signs sooner, for staying as long as I did, for all the ways I thought I failed. Because I didn't fail. I survived. And now, every day I wake up free from his control. Every woman I help find her own freedom. Every law that gets changed. Every survivor who raises her voice. That's not just survival. That's victory. That's justice. That's me taking the worst thing that ever happened to me and transforming it into meaning. Marcus Whitfield tried to destroy me, but he didn't know that some things, when broken, become stronger in the healing, like bones that knit back together, like steel tempered by fire. He took so much from me. My baby, my ability to have children, my mother, years of my life spent in fear and recovery. But he couldn't take my voice. He couldn't take my choice to fight back. He couldn't take my decision to help others. He couldn't take my future. And in the end, that's what mattered most. I am Sarah Bennett. I am a survivor. I am an advocate. I am strong enough to be vulnerable, brave enough to ask for help, and determined enough to never give up. My story didn't end in that hospital room or that courtroom. It's still being written. And the best chapters, they're still ahead. Sarah closed her laptop and looked out the hotel window at the city below. Somewhere out there were women still trapped, still afraid, still suffering. But also somewhere out there were survivors like her, building new lives, finding their voices, refusing to be silenced. Tomorrow, she'd keep fighting for them. Tonight, she'd rest, because she'd learned something essential through all of this. You can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care isn't selfish. Rest isn't weakness. Healing isn't linear. And most importantly, you don't have to be perfect to be powerful. Sarah Bennett, who'd once lost everything, had found something even more valuable: herself.